The Volthar were an ancient and proud species, feared throughout the galaxy. Their massive empire stretched across countless worlds, and their warriors were unmatched in combat. For generations, they had perfected the art of the hunt, tracking down the deadliest prey in the universe. It was their tradition, their rite of passage, and it defined their very existence. To capture the most elusive and dangerous species was the greatest honor. When a new mission came through their commanders, Captain Zorak and his team were assigned to hunt the humans of Earth, a planet that seemed primitive and unworthy of the Volthar's attention at first glance. But the reports had been clear: humans, though small and seemingly weak, had the potential for incredible resilience. And Zorak, ever eager to prove the superiority of his kind, saw this as an opportunity to make an example of them. From the command ship in orbit, Zorak watched Earth closely through his sensors. The humans, oblivious to the incoming danger, continued their daily lives below. They seemed insignificant, nothing more than a brief distraction for a hunter like himself. He smiled to himself. How hard could it be to catch one of these creatures? He had hunted beasts far larger and more dangerous across the galaxy. But there was something about this challenge that stirred a different kind of anticipation in him. The humans were unpredictable, and that alone made them intriguing. With a swift motion, Zorak gave the order to begin the hunt. His team, equipped with state-of-the-art technology, prepared for a hunt unlike any other. They descended in their cloaked ships, landing near dense forests, deserts, and cities. The Volthar believed in the art of stealth. They would not simply land and attack. They would stalk their prey, testing the humans' instincts, pushing them to the edge. The hunt would begin quietly, with no warning. Zorak expected to find one human, track them down, and prove the Volthar's strength. It would be swift, and Earth would fall under the weight of their superiority. Yet, as the first few hours passed, Zorak began to feel a strange unease. His team, seasoned hunters with years of experience, was encountering unexpected challenges. The human settlements appeared small and disorganized, but the individuals within them were unlike any prey they had ever hunted. The humans moved quickly, their senses alert. More than once, Zorak had seen flashes of movement in the corner of his eye, only for the target to vanish into the shadows. It was as if the humans could feel the danger, instinctively knowing when to flee. The Volthar's sensors, which had easily tracked countless creatures across the galaxy, seemed useless on Earth. Each time they locked onto a human, they would disappear or hide before the Volthar could close in. Zorak's team began to grow frustrated. These humans weren't like the predictable prey they were used to. There was something wild about them, something that made them harder to catch than they should have been. And that's when Zorak realized this would not be the simple hunt he had imagined. The more he observed, the more his curiosity grew. Earth was a planet of strange creatures, each with its own methods of survival. The humans were unpredictable, yes, but there was also a sense of purpose in their movements, a drive to stay alive no matter the odds. Zorak had underestimated them, and now, with every passing moment, he could feel the pressure mounting. He couldn't fail. His reputation as a hunter, his pride as a Volthar warrior, were all on the line. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were not the only ones being hunted. There was something more at play here, something he didn't fully understand. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the planet below, his mind racing. This hunt was going to be harder than he had anticipated, but that only made it more exciting. The chase had only just begun, and he was already feeling a strange thrill. He knew, deep down, that the humans had something to teach him about survival. This hunt would be unlike any other he had faced before. The question now was not whether the Volthar could capture a single human, but whether the humans, with their strange, unpredictable ways, could actually outsmart them. The Volthar were known for their technological prowess, and they had equipped their team with the finest tools available. Zorak had no doubt that they would swiftly capture their human prey. The first move was to deploy their advanced tracking devices, designed to detect even the smallest signals from the humans. They expected the humans' primitive technology to be no match for their own. Yet, As soon as the devices were activated, something unexpected happened. The tracking systems failed. The devices pinged empty air, as if the humans they were searching for had vanished into thin air. Zorak's face tightened in frustration. He had been prepared for resistance, but this was beyond his expectations. His team scrambled, rechecking their equipment, but nothing seemed to work. The humans they targeted appeared to have vanished. No heat signatures, no radio signals, no movement, only silence. It was as if the humans had simply melted into their environment. This wasn't the easy hunt Zorak had anticipated. Confused but determined, Zorak gave the order to adapt their strategy. They had to move on foot. There was no other choice. He activated the cloaking technology on his team's suits, rendering them nearly invisible to the human eye, and instructed them to begin their search on the ground. The Volthar were skilled hunters, and they knew how to move through dense forests, across cityscapes, and even through the most challenging terrains without being seen. The hunt would be personal now. They would track the humans one by one, using their superior strength and stealth to close in and capture their prey directly. But as Zorak and his warriors moved deeper into the human world, something began to feel wrong. The humans, though clearly unaware of their presence, didn't seem to act the way Zorak had expected. They weren't hiding in fear. They weren't panicking. Instead, they seemed prepared. There were no signs of chaos or confusion, and the streets were oddly quiet. It was as if the humans had known they were being hunted long before the Volthar had even landed. Zorak's team moved cautiously, expecting a surprise attack at any moment. Yet, nothing happened. For hours, they scoured the area with no success. The humans were nowhere to be found. The Volthar began to grow uneasy. Then, just as Zorak's patience was beginning to wear thin, they made their first contact. A human, no more than a shadow in the dim light of an alleyway, suddenly appeared before them. It was as if the human had materialized out of nowhere. The Volthar didn't hesitate. With swift movements, they closed in, surrounding the human. But instead of panicking or trying to flee, the human merely smiled. Zorak's instincts screamed that something was wrong, but he was too late to react. Without warning, the human vanished again, slipping between their legs and into the maze of darkened streets. Zorak's team was left standing in shock. How could a single human move with such speed? How had they evaded the Volthar, so much stronger and faster so easily? The Volthar had been trained to capture their prey, not to chase ghosts. And now they were the ones being made to look foolish. The feeling of being outplayed gnawed at Zorak. He had underestimated these humans. But it wasn't just the human speed that caught them off guard. The humans were smart, too. As the Volthar pressed on, they began to notice small things, traps laid out in unexpected places, objects moved to confuse the hunters, and faint footprints leading them in the wrong direction. The humans were using their environment to their advantage, something the Volthar hadn't anticipated. Zorak could feel the tension growing among his team. They were used to dominating their prey, not being outsmarted at every turn. The hunt had suddenly become a battle of wits. The humans were resilient, resourceful, and relentless in their pursuit of survival. Every time the Volthar thought they had cornered a human, they were left with nothing but empty air and a growing sense of doubt. Zorak's pride was taking a blow with every misstep. What had seemed like an easy conquest was turning into an intricate game of survival, where the humans were starting to turn the tables. The thrill of the chase had quickly turned into a dangerous game where the hunters could very well become the hunted. As Zorak watched his team stumble through the human world, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were in over their heads. This wasn't just a hunt anymore. It was a battle for their survival, and the humans were making sure the Volthar knew it. Amid the growing chaos, when the Volthar had already begun to doubt their superiority, one human stood out among the rest. His name was Mark Callahan, and he was far from what the Volthar had anticipated. Mark wasn't just another civilian to be captured. He was a former Special Forces operative with years of combat experience. He had seen the darkest corners of the world, survived missions that had broken lesser men, and escaped impossible situations. It became quickly clear to Zorak and his team that they weren't dealing with an ordinary human. They were facing someone who could match their every move, and in some cases, outsmart them at every turn. Zorak's team, though skilled, found themselves at a loss. They had hunted across the galaxy, yet this human seemed to anticipate their every move. The first encounter with Mark came unexpectedly. Zorak's team cornered a human near a densely wooded area, thinking they had the perfect advantage. But when they tried to approach, Mark simply disappeared into the shadows. It wasn't that he was faster, he was simply more aware of his surroundings, using every inch of the terrain to his benefit. The Volthar, used to being the predators, were now the ones fumbling in the dark. Zorak's warriors fanned out, their cloaking devices activated, but Mark was never where they thought he would be. He moved through the trees like a ghost, and every time they closed in, he was already gone. At first, the Volthar dismissed it as a fluke. Perhaps Mark had just been lucky once or twice. But as the hunt continued, the pattern became undeniable. Mark wasn't running from them, he was toying with them. He was aware of their every move, and with remarkable ease, he evaded their traps and disrupted their plans. The Volthar had expected the humans to be simple prey, easy to outmaneuver. But what they were facing now wasn't just a survivor, it was a predator in its own right, a human capable of turning the tables. Every time they tried to encircle him, Mark was always one step ahead. He would lead them into narrow paths where their technology couldn't help them, then slip away while they struggled to recalibrate their systems. At one point, Zorak's team thought they had him cornered in an abandoned building, only for Mark to sabotage their equipment. The Volthar found themselves immobilized, their own technology turned against them, as Mark used their confusion to escape yet again. The more they encountered Mark, the more they realized how deep his cunning ran. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. He was turning the Volthar's strengths into weaknesses. He would use their own methods against them, and with every failed attempt to capture him, the Volthar's confidence began to crack. Zorak himself, a battle-hardened warrior who had led countless hunts to victory, found his mind racing. This was unlike anything he had experienced. How was one human doing this? They had the best technology, the sharpest minds, and the finest warriors, but they were being outplayed by someone with nothing but his instincts and wit. As the days dragged on, it became clearer that Mark was no mere prey. He was in control of the hunt now. It was no longer about the Volthar capturing him. It was about whether they could survive long enough to retreat. Every move they made, every trap they set, was anticipated and thwarted, and Mark, without any visible sign of panic, moved through the shadows like a hunter himself. He was picking them off one by one, causing more damage with each encounter. Zorak's frustration grew, and his team started to falter. They were no longer the ones in charge of the hunt. The Volthar had become the prey. What had started as a simple mission had spiraled into something far more dangerous. Zorak had underestimated the humans, and in doing so, he had unleashed a force he could not easily control. With each failed attempt to capture Mark, the Volthar's pride took a hit. Zorak could feel his grip on the situation slipping. The question that haunted him now wasn't whether he could capture Mark. It was whether he and his team would even survive this hunt. Mark Callahan, the man they had written off as easy prey, was now showing them just how dangerous humanity could be. And Zorak was beginning to realize that he wasn't the hunter anymore. He was being hunted. The Volthar had come to Earth expecting an easy victory. What they found instead was a human who was quickly proving that sometimes the greatest threat doesn't come from strength or technology, it comes from the mind. As the days stretched on, the Volthar's confidence began to crumble. What had started as a straightforward hunt quickly turned into something far more chaotic, and the Volthar found themselves fighting for control in a game they hadn't expected. Mark Callahan, the human they had underestimated, was no longer merely evading capture, he was toying with them. The once pristine tactics of the Volthar were being dismantled piece by piece. Mark had a knack for misdirection, setting up traps that not only delayed the Volfar, but made them second-guess every decision they made. His cunning was unmatched. He would lead them into open fields, only to disappear in the blink of an eye. He would leave false trails that seemed to go on for miles, leading the Volfar to believe they were closing in, only to find themselves at the edge of a cliff or deep in a ravine with no sign of him. The longer the chase continued, the more it became clear. Mark wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. The Volfar, once the galaxy's greatest hunters, were now the ones being hunted. His traps weren't always physical. Sometimes they were mental. He would leave just enough of a trail to spark the Volfar's desire to chase, then pull them deeper into the woods, away from their original target. At times, Mark would even let them get close, just enough to feel the victory within their grasp, only to slip away at the last second, vanishing into the thick forest or blending into the city's shadows. Every time they thought they had him, he would mock them by letting them think they were winning, only to escape with a grin on his face. His ability to stay calm, to anticipate their every move, began to break the Volfar's spirit. Zorak could feel the tide turning. His once confident team was now growing more impatient, more irritable. Their tactics, once sharp and precise, had turned to chaos. Their hunt had become a chase, a frantic scramble through the forests and cities, with no sign of Mark in sight. Zorak, ever the leader, struggled to maintain control. He tried to remind his team of their superior technology, their strength, but deep down, he knew they were losing ground. With every failed attempt to capture Mark, the Volfar's pride eroded just a little more. Mark wasn't just outwitting them, he was making them look like fools. What frustrated Zorak even more was the mocking confidence in Mark's every action. The human wasn't afraid, he wasn't desperate, he was having fun. Zorak saw it in his eyes every time they came close to catching him. Mark would pause for a moment, just long enough to glance back and grin, before slipping through their fingers once again. It was a cruel game for Mark, one he played effortlessly, while the Volfar became more and more frustrated. The Volfar were a species built on pride and power, and nothing had ever humiliated them like this before. They were used to dominating their prey, to commanding every situation. But now it was as if they were being pulled into Mark's world, a world where the rules were different and survival depended on wit, not brute force. As the hunt dragged on, the once precise movements of Zorak's team became sloppy. The Volfar, accustomed to keeping their emotions in check, were beginning to crack under the pressure. The chase, which had once seemed like a simple exercise, was now a test of endurance. They had been made to look weak in front of their enemies. This single human had shown them how vulnerable they truly were. Zorak was losing his cool. His mind, usually clear and focused, was clouded with frustration. The more they tried to track Mark, the more they felt as though they were getting nowhere. Mark's flair for the hunt began to push the Volfar to their limits. He was no longer just a target, they were now playing by his rules. Zorak could sense the change within his team. They were becoming reckless, chasing shadows, losing focus. Mark had turned the tables, and with each passing day, his confidence grew. He was no longer just surviving. He was enjoying this, reveling in the challenge. He had become something greater than a prey. He had become the hunter. Zorak stood at the edge of a clearing, his hands clenched into fists. He had come here to capture one human, but now he realized he was fighting for his team's survival. Mark was no longer just an opponent to be caught. He had become a symbol of everything the Volfar had underestimated, and the more they chased, the more it felt as though they were walking straight into his trap. The chase was no longer a simple game, it was a test of who would break first. Would the Volfar recover, or would the human continue to outwit them at every turn? The answer, Zorak feared, was no longer in his hands. The longer the chase dragged on, the more it became clear that the balance of power had shifted. Zorak's team, once so confident in their superiority, was now on the defensive. It wasn't just that Mark was evading them. He was now actively hunting them, turning the tables in a way that Zorak and his warriors could never have imagined. Mark's military background had prepared him for situations like this, where the hunter becomes the hunted. With every encounter, Mark had grown bolder, more daring, and increasingly skilled at exploiting the Volfar's weaknesses. He didn't just evade capture, he started to capture them. One by one, the Volfar warriors began to fall victim to Mark's clever traps. Using his knowledge of their technology, he turned their own devices against them. He knew how to disable their cloaking devices, how to break their tracking systems, and how to use their superior strength and equipment against them. His tactics were cold, calculated, and incredibly effective. Each time a Volfar warrior tried to close in on him, Mark would outthink them, setting traps that rendered their technology useless. It was like he had studied them, watched them closely, and now he was using that knowledge to dismantle their superiority piece by piece. It started with a simple ambush. A Volfar warrior, overconfident in their ability to capture Mark, ventured too far into the woods. Mark, knowing their every move, set a trap. The Volfar soldier was disarmed and incapacitated, left stranded in a remote area of the planet with nothing but the harsh elements to deal with. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a humiliation. Mark didn't kill them. Instead, he left them alive, forcing them to survive on their own. He knew this would break them, mentally and physically, in ways that an outright battle couldn't. The Volfar had never encountered such a twisted form of warfare. The idea that a single human, one they had considered a mere prey, could capture and outsmart them so easily was unimaginable. But Mark wasn't finished. He didn't just capture one warrior, he did it again and again. Each time, he took another Volfar down, playing a cruel game of cat and mouse. He would leave them in impossible situations, forcing them to face nature's fury or wander aimlessly in the wilderness. As he brought each captured Volfar back, Zorak watched helplessly, his fury growing with every failure. The Volfar, the greatest hunters in the galaxy, were now being humiliated by the very prey they had set out to capture. Mark's actions were more than just practical, they were psychological. With each captured Volfar, the morale of Zorak's team began to crumble. They were no longer just failing at the hunt, they were losing something much more valuable, their pride. The Volfar had prided themselves on their dominance, their skill, their unshakable belief in their superiority. But Mark had shown them that even the strongest hunter could be outsmarted by sheer will and cunning. It was as if Mark was slowly stripping away their very identity. Every time they saw a fellow warrior captured, they lost a piece of their confidence, and with that loss, the fear began to take root. Zorak's anger reached its peak. He couldn't bear the sight of his warriors being captured one by one, and the fact that it was a single human doing this to them was beyond infuriating. This was no longer just about the hunt, it was a matter of survival. Zorak's once iron grip on the situation had slipped, and now the Volfar were the ones fighting to avoid total defeat. The chase had transformed from a simple hunt into a desperate battle for dominance, with Zorak at the forefront, trying to claw his way back to power. The Volfar were no longer focused on capturing Mark. They were focused on stopping him, on breaking his spirit before he could destroy theirs completely. But Mark wasn't stopping. He seemed to enjoy this game, the way he baited the Volfar into traps, leading them to their own downfall. For Mark, this wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that the Volfar, despite all their strength and technology, were just as vulnerable as anyone else. He reveled in the challenge, knowing that with every Volfar warrior he captured, he was slowly chipping away at the invincible image they had built for themselves. To Mark, this hunt was no longer just about escaping. It was about turning the tables, about making the Volfar regret underestimating the humans. Zorak, his mind racing with anger and desperation, realized the truth. The Volfar had lost control. The human they had sought to capture was now in charge, and with every captured warrior, Mark's victory seemed more inevitable. The sun had just begun to set, casting long shadows across the desolate field where Zorak and Mark Callahan would face each other for the final time. The world around them was eerily quiet, as if nature itself held its breath, waiting to see how the battle would unfold. The Volfa leader, Zorak, stood tall, his powerful form silhouetted against the fading light. His armor gleamed with advanced technology, and his eyes burned with a fury that had been building for days. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for since the hunt began. Mark Callahan, the human who had outsmarted him and his warriors at every turn, stood across from him, unarmed but undeterred. He had no need for weapons. His mind had proven to be his greatest asset. Zorak wasted no time. With a roar, he activated the weapons built into his armor, launching energy blasts toward Mark, the air crackling with power. His strikes were fast, brutal, and unforgiving, meant to overwhelm his prey with raw force. But Mark wasn't rattled. He had been in countless battles, faced impossible odds, and had learned to think on his feet. As the blasts surged toward him, Mark dove to the side, rolling into the tall grass and disappearing into the shadows. Zorak's eyes narrowed as he scanned the field, trying to track his elusive opponent. He had no doubt that Mark was hiding, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Volfa leader moved cautiously, his every step calculated, his senses heightened. He knew Mark was good, better than he had ever expected. But Zorak was certain that his superior strength and alien technology would give him the edge. He activated his cloaking device, blending into the environment, ready to ambush Mark when the time came. But Mark was ready for that too. He had studied Zorak's tactics, learned the rhythms of his movements. Just as Zorak stepped forward, Mark launched himself from his hiding spot, using the terrain to his advantage. The field, with its scattered rocks and uneven ground, became a battlefield where Mark's quick reflexes and adaptability gave him the upper hand. Zorak tried to react, but Mark was already on him. With precise timing, Mark used the environment to trap Zorak in his own gadgets. He had noticed earlier that Zorak's armor relied heavily on a series of powerful but cumbersome energy shields. Mark had set up a series of reflective surfaces hidden among the rocks and tall grass, designed to deflect Zorak's blasts back at him. It worked flawlessly. One blast ricocheted off a rock and slammed into Zorak's own shield, short-circuiting his armor and momentarily stunning him. The alien warrior staggered back, but Mark was relentless. With the element of surprise on his side, Mark lunged at Zorak, knocking him to the ground and using his own weapon against him. Zorak's advanced tech was formidable, but it was no match for Mark's ingenuity. Every move Mark made was calculated, every strike designed to disarm, disable, and ultimately defeat the alien invader. Zorak fought back with all his might, using his strength to try and overpower Mark. But Mark was always one step ahead, dodging, weaving, and outthinking him at every turn. For every attack Zorak launched, Mark had a counter, each one executed with cold precision. The alien's brute force was no match for the human's adaptability. Zorak, exhausted and disoriented, could feel the tide turning. His once imposing strength felt less impressive with every passing second. His armor, once a symbol of invincibility, now felt heavy and cumbersome. It was clear that Mark's mind, his ability to read the situation and adapt, was his greatest weapon. And Zorak was beginning to realize it was a weapon the Volfa could never replicate. With one final, calculated move, Mark grabbed Zorak's weapon, using his own momentum against him. The alien leader was brought down, his face hitting the cold ground with a thud. Zorak tried to struggle, to fight back, but it was too late. Mark, breathing heavily but resolute, stood over him. The mighty leader of the Volfa, who had once ruled with an iron fist, now lay humbled and defeated, his power reduced to nothing. Mark's victory wasn't just a personal one, it was a message. A statement to the Volfa, to the galaxy, that no matter how advanced or powerful one might be, human ingenuity and determination could overcome even the most insurmountable odds. Zorak, pinned beneath Mark's boot, could only stare up in disbelief. He had underestimated humanity, and in doing so, had sealed his own fate. Mark Callahan had proven that the greatest weapon in the universe wasn't strength or technology, it was the human mind. And now, with Zorak captured, the hunt was over. The once proud Valthar leader had been brought low by a single human, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson that had been taught on that desolate field. The battle was over, but the message was only just beginning to echo through the stars. Mark Callahan stood tall, his chest heaving from the exertion of the fight, but there was no sign of fatigue in his eyes. The leader of the Valthar, Zorak, lay defeated at his feet, but Mark wasn't finished. He wasn't just interested in winning the fight. He wanted to make sure the Valthar knew exactly what they had lost. With a smirk, Mark grabbed Zorak by the collar of his armor, dragging him like a prized trophy. But Zorak wasn't the only one. One by one, Mark pulled the 3 Valthar warriors, still alive but humiliated, to their feet. Each of them had been bested in their own way, trapped by the very environment they thought they could control. These were warriors, hardened by countless hunts, but against Mark, they had been reduced to mere prey. As Mark dragged the defeated Valthar back toward their ship, he made sure every single one of them, Zorak included, was clearly visible to the alien fleet that had gathered in orbit. The Valthar fleet had come to Earth with the belief that they were invincible, that no primitive species could stand against their might. They had come to hunt, to conquer, to show their superiority. But what they were witnessing now was the opposite. A human, alone, had not only outwitted them, but had made a mockery of their entire mission. Mark's message was as clear as it was simple. Earth might have been a primitive world, but its people had something the Valthar could never hope to understand: ingenuity, resilience, and an unwavering will to survive no matter the odds. The alien fleet remained eerily silent as they watched their mighty warriors dragged before them, their pride broken. The once invincible Valthar had been humiliated by a single human, and no amount of advanced technology could change the truth that now hung heavy in the air. The remaining Valthar forces had no choice but to accept what had happened. They had underestimated humanity, believing their superior strength and tech would ensure an easy victory. Now, as they looked upon the captured warriors, they understood just how wrong they had been. Mark had turned their greatest strength into their most painful weakness, and the Valthar were forced to retreat, their mission a complete failure. The Valthar fleet began to move away from Earth, their pride shattered, their reputation tarnished across the galaxy. As they retreated, the tension between them and Mark remained palpable. They had been forced to abandon their hunt, leaving behind the very species they had once thought insignificant. Earth had not only survived, it had triumphed. Mark had been the symbol of humanity's strength, and as the alien ships disappeared into the stars, the message they left behind was undeniable. Humans were not to be underestimated. For Mark, however, the victory was far from over. He had done what no one expected, taken on the Valthar with nothing but his wits and his training, and had come out on top. But he wasn't basking in the glory of his triumph for long. The fight had been exhilarating, and he was already thinking ahead, eager for the next challenge. He had brought back 3 Valthar, after all, 3 highly trained warriors, without breaking a sweat. And if the Valthar thought that was impressive, Mark had even bigger plans. For him, this wasn't just about defending Earth. It was about showing the galaxy that humans could take on the mightiest of invaders and turn the tables with a bit of creativity, resourcefulness, and a lot of grit. As he walked away from the battlefield, dragging his trophies behind him, Mark couldn't help but grin. The battle had been won, the Valthar defeated, and Earth's place in the galaxy had been solidified. But he knew this was only the beginning. There would always be new challenges, new enemies, and new opportunities to prove just how far humanity could go. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment to savor the victory. He had made the impossible possible, and the galaxy would remember the name Mark Callahan. After all, he hadn't just defeated the Valthar, he'd made it look easy. And the rest of the universe would soon understand what they had all missed. Earth was not a planet to be trifled with. The Valthar were just the beginning.